All right. Well, hello and welcome to the Voices of the Underheard podcast. We're really excited. This is our first podcast interview. Here on this podcast, we aim to reduce stigma by leaning into stories and experiences of others. And on this podcast, we're focused on experiences of those who have been incarcerated. My name is Ariana Gonzalez. I'm an occupational therapist and executive director and founder of Later, which is where this podcast was born. Through working with individuals day in and day out, I could not help but think if others could only hear and see and feel what I hear and see and feel from these people that I work with, maybe there wouldn't be so much stigma. So that's kind of what brought us here today. And I challenge you to develop your compassion and lean into these stories. So I'd like to go ahead and pass it on to Scott Tompkins, who will also be co-hosting today's interview.
Thanks, Ariana. My name's Scott Tompkins. I'm a board member of Later, and also I work with A Brighter Way, which is another Ypsilanti-based organization, and I work with PCAP at the University of Michigan, the Prison Creative Arts Project. And before we get to our guest of honor, I'd also like to take a minute to let our other guests here introduce themselves. So, ladies.
Hello, I'm Elise Boyle. I'm a full-time occupational therapist at Later. I'm also the vice president on our board. I can pass it on to Kaylee to continue our introductions.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kaylee Tracer. I'm a master's level occupational therapy student from Eastern Michigan University, and we are completing our level 2 field work.
Hi, my name is Cassie Tanana. Same as Kaylee, I'm a level 2 occupational therapy student working with Later.
Thank you, guys. Now for the final introduction, I'm super excited that Leroy Harris agreed to be our first to be interviewed on this podcast. He's an outstanding individual and one of Later's board members. He's also passionate about education for violence prevention, especially with youth. And Leroy, what else did I miss about credentials or anything else you want to share about yourself to get us started?
Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning. First, I want to thank Later and you guys for allowing me to do this podcast with you guys. This is my first podcast, and I just want to thank you guys for allowing me to be here. Also, I'm an unpublished author. I've written 4 books. Haven't got them published yet, but I'm on my way to get them published. And I enjoy loving other human beings. You know, my passion is to help others, especially the youth, not experience the things that I had to experience growing up, man. You know, I've done a lot of things in my youth that I didn't have to do, and those things led me to prison. So, you know, my thing is to be able to give back to the society the things that I took from society, and that is good instruction. You know, good instruction, and to help others not be what I had to be growing up. And I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you, Leroy. We're really excited to hear more about you and your story, your wisdom and advice. So I was hoping if you could start off by kind of giving us your background or your story in about 3 minutes or less, if you can.
Okay. I grew up in Ypsilanti. I grew up in Ann Arbor, Ypsilanti, Michigan. Most people that saw me would think that I grew up in a nice home. But being inside the home, no one knows what was going on in that home except me and my brother and I. At a young age, my mother was very violent and abusive towards my brother and I. And that led us to the streets. You know, going through the stuff we went through at home forced us to not want to be home. Yeah. So we started hanging out in the streets, and the streets became our mother and father. You know, at 14 years old, I became a drug dealer. I ran the streets, sold drugs, did violent stuff, and eventually selling drugs and crime led me to a situation where someone lost their life at my hand. And the worst thing I could have ever done in my life. And that led me to 35 years in prison. I was actually sentenced to spend the rest of my life in prison. But by the grace of God, the laws do change. You know, I was a juvenile when I did what I did. And by the laws changing saying that they could not give a juvenile a life without parole sentence, you know, that allowed me to come home. And I'm here to tell about it today. And I think that my story will help others understand why most young people actually go to the streets and become a deviant, you know? And I think that it starts at home, man. You know, I hate to say it, me and my brother talked about this a lot. I hated to talk about what we went through at home because I felt like I was throwing my mother and my father under the bus. And my brother always said, he said, man, listen, man, you shouldn't look at it like that. You need to tell the right people what happened. Because allowing the right people to know what happened, we can actually help some other people not go through the same things we went through. So it took me a long time to be even to talk about this. I love my mother. You know, I don't want to tell people that my mother used to beat us up so bad to where we hated to be at home. I don't want to tell people that, you know. And most people that know my mother, they love my mother because my mother was a good person to everybody except me and my brother. And that was the ironic thing about it. You know, everybody loves my mother, you know, but me and my brother, it was like we had to learn to depend on each other inside that house. That's why we're so close today, because we felt like we only had each other inside that house, you know. And I think that's what actually led me to prison, and what motivated me to actually start trying to help other people, young people, to not be able to go through the things that I went through. You know? And all I can do is praise God for it. You know, I thank the Lord for allowing me to go through the bad things I went through in my life, but also allowing me to, or showing me how to turn myself around. And that's what I did while I was in prison.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that was a really powerful way to start this podcast. And I think a lot of people watching this can relate to a similar experience that you just expressed and you went through.
Yeah. And thank you too, because I'm excited about people being able to hear this, and like you said, kind of shining a light on sometimes where it starts for people and the reasoning why. I think that's the piece that's going to help people understand. And when you understand, you can have compassion, and that is where we can hopefully lead to reducing stigma. That actually leads me to one of my other questions. So how do you, if at all, believe that being incarcerated, how did that shape your ability to like give meaning to your life?
I think that growing up the way I grew up, I never thought that I really had control over my life. I never thought that I had the ability to give meaning to my life.
Yeah.
Because I found myself always trying to be what other people wanted me to be. And that part of myself, I was always wanting to please people, please the wrong people. And when I went to prison, I learned a lot of things in prison. You know, I learned a lot about different people in prison. And I have to say this, it took prison to make me to really understand that I do have power and control over my life. And I hate to say that, but going to prison did do some good things for me. And I think that at that time, maybe it was best that I actually go to prison to learn the lessons that I had to learn there in order for me to be the person I am today. Because today, I know that I can control my life. Like back then, I didn't know that I can choose my peers. I thought my peers were just the people around me that I had to actually be like, or had to want to be like, or had to do the things they wanted me to do. I didn't know I could choose other peers. But now in my life, I can choose to be around the people that I want to be around. You know, I can choose to be a citizen today. You know, I don't have to be a gangster to be liked by other people today. I don't have to be those things that I thought I had to be back then. You know, so today I've learned that I can actually choose my peers. For instance, the board members are later, you guys are my peers. So that means that when I live my life, I always think about, well, what would Ariana think about what I'm saying or doing? What would Elise think about what I'm saying or doing? What would Scott think about what I'm saying or doing? And that helps me to stay focused, helps me stay focused. So now I do believe that I have the power to control my destiny and my life. And going to prison taught me that.
Wow.
And I don't want people to think that you have to go to prison to be taught that. You don't. It was just something I had to do in order for me to learn who I am and the power I have within myself. We can actually help other people learn that without having to go to prison.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just the route I had to go myself.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I feel like everything that you're saying feels very powerful. Again, I'm excited to have you here. I think, too, the way that you describe getting meaning through that experience, it's interesting. I wonder, I have a follow-up question, if that's okay. I wonder if you attribute most of that understanding of being able to control your peers or who you're around, who you surround yourself with, and learning about who you are. Do you attribute that to the experience of being incarcerated, or was it also, because you said that you were incarcerated as a juvenile, was it just aging, or was it both?
I think it was aging. It might have been a little bit of both, because being a youngster, like I said, you want to be liked by your peers.
Yeah.
And going to prison for the first few years, I was the same way that I was in society when I went to prison. So I was still trying to make people believe that I was a certain type of person.
Mm-hmm.
But as I began to develop and become, like, I wrote a poem and explained how it took me 47 years to become a man.
Wow.
And in that poem, I explained how I knew that I was a man when I was no longer affected by what other people thought about me. Like in prison, the culture was gangism in prison. So the culture was more like, you had to carry a knife, you had to protect yourself, you had to do this, you had to do that. You had predators trying to do this, you had the staff trying to do this. So you was always on your P's and Q's. But I remember the day that I realized and I knew that I was becoming a man. I was on the yard, and one of my close comrades come to me and say, "Man, listen, I see you just moved up here with us. I need a place to hide my knife. I know you got a place." And I said, "Man, I don't do that stuff no more, man. I ain't into that no more." And my guy looked at me and he turned around like he didn't know who he was talking to. So he leaned and he said, "Man, you serious?" I said, "Yeah, man, I ain't on that no more, man." And he was like, "Man, I can't believe." He said, "Man, don't tell nobody else that on this yard, man, because people expect you to be a certain way." I said, "Man, I don't care nothing about that no more. You can tell everybody I don't care, man. I'm not on that no more. And if you still on that, you shouldn't be around me, man, because I'm not on that." And when I started to really separate myself from people that I grew up with in prison,
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted to do something different in my life, that was the greatest test ever. Because these men depended on me to be a certain way in prison.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was no longer the way they depend on me to be, it was like it created an immediate dislike for me and them.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were like, "Oh, he's changing. We can't use him anymore." Listen what I'm saying. We can't use him anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because all my life I had been used by other people. But it took me 47 years to understand that I need to learn how to use myself for the good instead of the bad. And that's what I learned.
Well, thank you. Scott, I'm going to pass it to you. Otherwise, I'm going to take up all of the time asking follow-up.
Well, Leroy, you're familiar with the notion of a stigma. It's kind of like
Yes.
You've heard of like the scarlet letter and other ways that people kind of cast people in certain roles. Given that, how has stigma associated with incarceration impacted you personally in your life since you've been home?
Oh man, a lot, especially with me trying to get jobs, me trying to get places to live. It's amazing. I always tell this story how it was easy for me to finance a vehicle than it was for me to get a place to live. And I never could understand. I was sitting here and I never could understand. I'm like, why is it easy for me to get a vehicle and it's for me to get a place to live? That stigma of being in prison, even when I deal with like certain women and things of that nature, I talked to this certain woman, and she, before she let me in her home, she really researched why I went to prison. She really went and did her research. So we were talking, and I didn't know she did that. And she was like, yeah, I read your stuff. I want to ask you some questions. So she starts asking me about my crime and my case and how I grew up and things of that nature. We were sitting at her house. So I was like, you really read that stuff? She was like, well, Leroy, I like you. And she said that I wanted to know more about you because eventually I want you to meet my sons. And I needed to ask you some questions about that. And she told me, she said at first she was like, when she read it, she did this. She's like, whoa, wait a minute. And that's a stigma. That right there is like, people don't know really who you are. They judge you based upon the crime you committed, or they judge you based upon the things you've been through in your life rather than knowing the type of person you are. And don't understand the circumstances that surround what actually happened that night, because they never asked those questions. So I've dealt with a lot of that since I've been home, a lot of it. With me, it's like, my way of dealing with it is, I'm not the same person I was 35 years ago. And I just ask people to just give me a chance to prove that I am not that person anymore. If you don't give me a chance, I'm not mad at you. I'm not angry at you, because I've done some things in my life that I shouldn't have done as a juvenile. And that's what it was, as a juvenile. So that's my way of actually dealing with it.
No, that's powerful. Thank you for sharing that. That's not always easy to share those things that are kind of at your root basis there. Now you did like 35 years, right?
Yes, sir.
And then when you came home, was there anything that you wish you had coming home that you didn't have? And that could be people or materials or whatever. So were there things missing in your world when you came home?
I'm gonna say, before I came home, I was nervous. Because in my mind, I was like, I don't know where my first meal is coming from. I don't know where I'm getting clothes from. I had real bad social anxiety because I've dealt with prisoners all my life. I know prison, but I don't know humanity anymore. In prison, everybody got a mask on. You wear your mask every day. Nobody in prison tells you who they really are. And so having a mask on for that long and having the courage to take your mask off, it scared the death out of me coming home. But what I really wished that I had when I first come home was, I wish I had money, because I understood that when I got here that without a certain amount of money, you really couldn't do what you needed to do. And that's what forced me to get a job quick, get a job fast, and try to focus on getting some type of stability based around me having a steady income, because without a steady income, I could not survive out here. And I know guys that came home that got exonerated. They came home to like thousands of dollars. And their transition was so easy. And I'm looking at them like, okay, well, how am I gonna do my transition? Because I don't have no thousand dollars. I wasn't exonerated. But what I did was, my father taught me a lesson growing up. And he took me in the basement, and he had those the penny holders. Mm-hmm. And he had a big jar full of pennies. And he said, son, always remember this about money. He said that pennies make dollars. And he showed me, count on 100 pennies. He said, look, man, that's $1. He said, never be afraid to work for anything in your life. Never be afraid to start at the bottom. And I remember those lessons. I wish I'd remember those lessons when I was in society growing up as a child, but now I reflect upon the lessons I received from my mother and father now. And I began to understand why they taught me the things they taught me. And even my father was like, well, listen, man, you know, in life, you don't have to have a lot of money, but if you got good credit, you can always look like you got money and you can always do things you need to do. So I always think about that today. Like I'm trying to build my credit right now, you know? So when I first came out, it was money. I felt like I needed money to survive, but I didn't. All I needed to do was just be firm in who I am and take those small steps to actually building and getting my stability. And yes, sir.
Something you said that really kind of resonated with me because I did a couple of years in state prison myself, and people always think, well, all you do in there is lay around and sleep and hang out and da 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 da. And what you said about that you're always acting, you're always putting on a face, you're always putting on a persona, and I found it exhausting.
Yes, it
because
was.
you're performing every day, you know,
every day,
especially when you're like out on the yard or out of the compound or out of your unit.
That's right.
You're going to chow, you're going to this, you're going to go over to school or class or whatever.
That's right.
You're always on, and it's exhausting. I had forgotten that little aspect of the of the world exhausting. Inside, man. It just wears you down.
It wears you down, man.
It does. Well, I'm going to pass back over to Ariana. She's got another question for you too, my friend. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and I think of what you guys were just saying, I'm actually really interested in diving into, for those of us who have not had the experience of being incarcerated, could you, and even with this piece of performing, I'm curious, this is kind of a two-part question, if there were ever times that you felt like you didn't have to perform, and if so, when and where while you were incarcerated? I'll leave that question first.
Yes. Yes, there was times. Me being incarcerated, we had a group. I forgot the name that we called it, but we had like a think tank group that we created in a unit where we had certain guys would get together once a week and we would sit down and just talk. And this was one of the most powerful things that we could have ever done, because what it did was it allowed men to take that mask off for that moment around trusted people and to be able to tell people who they really are. Yeah. And there were only those times I was really able to just let everybody know exactly who I am and what I'm really about. And I've seen some of the most hardcore men cry. Mm. I couldn't believe it. I'm talking about men that you probably would think like, wait a minute, hold up. You know? But I didn't see them cry during these meetings we had. And I didn't see them break down. I've seen them I've seen a lot in there. And it let me know that a lot of those men have a hard exterior. But on the inside, some of them are still little boys, and that's real. Yeah. They have that little boy, that little child inside. They've always protected all their lives, like me. They always protected all their lives, but it takes a certain time where they really realize that that child still needs protection, but people need to know that he's there. Mm-hmm. You know, he's there. And I think those times were the best times I had when I was holding my groups. Like I took violence prevention. I was a therapeutic mentor. A therapeutic mentor was a violence prevention specialist. So what I did was, and it's funny because I had a natural life and I'm doing this because they don't even allow people with natural lives in prison to go to that class. The class is only for people going home within the next 2 to 4 years. But they allowed me to take the course and allowed me to become a tutor. So in that class, I was able to teach other men that were coming home how to use the skills that are actually being taught in violence prevention. Being in that class also allowed me to take my mask off as well. And it allowed other men to see me different in the way they see me on the yard. Mm. And what that did was that allowed people to understand it. Look, man, you ain't got to have that mask on all the time, man. You know, sometimes you can let people know who you really are. You know? Yeah. And it's dangerous doing that in prison. It was dangerous, you know.
Yeah.
And I thought the same thing when I come home. It was hard. The transition for me from the mask to actually being who I am out here was difficult. It was scary because when you think about it, the same predator type mind that you had in prison, you got out here. But the only difference is in prison, it's so tight and it's around you all day, you can't escape it. Out here, I live in my own home. So I can go outside and then come back and live in my own home and I ain't got to worry about nothing. In prison, you couldn't do that. You were always under pressure in prison. So, but being here, the transition was difficult for me. I had to really understand that I wanted to be human so bad for a lot of years. I just wanted to be human, man. And walking in the store and seeing a stranger, and the stranger looks me in my eyes and speaks to me. It scared me at first because I was like, what is this? Okay, what they on? Then I had to realize, man, they don't even know you, man. You're not in prison no more. So they're just being human, man. To have a neighbor wave and say hi, that stuff shocked me coming home because I didn't have that in there. You don't have guys in there saying what's up or hi, because we like, man, what you talking to me for? I don't know you. You know, and that was the mentality in prison. You know, I remember the first time I went into a store to give me some hair clippers, and the woman says, "Follow me, sir," and she takes me inside a little room. And I stood at the door of the room, and she said, "What's wrong with you, man? You better come in and get your stuff. I'm not getting it for you." And I was so afraid to go in that room with her because in prison you couldn't go in rooms with women. So my mind was still there, where it was too close for me to be in there with her, you know. And having an occupational therapist, that helped me a lot. Going through occupational therapy, oh man, I don't know why I keep forgetting the brother's name. I mean, the brother's name, Spencer.
Yeah.
Spencer helped me out so much. It's like he helped revive my humanity because he helped me to understand it's okay to be human, man. It's okay. And that right there, and then to have Elise come in, and that was extra special because I was always nervous around women. Being around Elise and understanding certain things, she allowed me to be able to be more comfortable in my own skin being around women because I haven't had that for 35 years, you know. And I enjoy you guys. I enjoy the way you guys help me. I hope I didn't get off the subject of the topic.
You're good. You're good.
But
all of it's
yeah,
right.
Okay.
Yeah, and I want to follow up. So I'm not doing great keeping on topic either, but with like your day-to-day routine while you're incarcerated, so we hear a little bit about like the mask and the feeling that the need to perform and how it can be unsafe to not perform and have that mask on. What is your day-to-day, like if you were to tell me what it's like when you wake up, like what does your day look like? Like paint a picture for people that have not had that experience and maybe have never stepped inside a prison or a jail.
My early years, my day-to-day was different than my later years in prison. The early years in prison, it was wake up, go to the weight pit, come back, go to work, and do what prison guys do to stay safe. That's all I can say in my early years, you hear me? I don't want to really talk about that now, but my early years, it was hard. You know, from 1988, up until around 98, 99, I was on that yard doing prison stuff to keep safe. But in my later years, this is when I realized I was a poet. I realized I could actually write books. I wrote a book called The Deconstruction of the Criminal Mind. And this book was a heavy book that I started writing, and I had I met a criminologist. She's a professor of criminology at Grand Valley State University. So she was editing all my books. And it's funny because she edited my book, The Deconstruction of the Criminal Mind. And in this book, I went through my whole history as a child growing up, my child being in prison. I mean, my experiences being in prison, being a part of religions in prison and things of that nature. And she noticed something in reading the book that I didn't even notice. And this is why I know it's funny. When she read the book, she called me Luke Ma. She said, Luke Ma, she said, I read the book, I liked it. I edited it for you. She said, but you have to change that. And I said, what do you mean? She said, because I noticed from your writing that the same spirit you had as a juvenile, you still have the same spirit, but you just tweaked it a little bit. And I was like, what do you mean? She said, well, the mentality of being a gangster, I can read it in your books. I can see it in the things that you write, that you still think like that. She said, and people like me, a studied reader, can see that you've really not changed. And I was like, whoa. And she shocked me with that. So when I started really looking at what she was trying to tell me where I needed to go, and that right there helped me to understand that I really needed to deal with myself, because you can't write a book and plagiarize who you are if you're writing about yourself. Because when you write about yourself comes out in your writings, you know. And that right there, it helped me a lot. She helped me a lot with dealing with that. But I wrote a book called Count the Cost. Count the Cost was a book that dealt with, I learned growing up that you have to always count what you have to give up, or consider what you might have to give up when you get involved in anything. Like, I wish I would have considered what I would have to give up by getting involved with crime, by getting involved with the wrong people. I never considered those things, you know? So as a grown-up, you have to consider the things you have to give up to get involved in anything, you know? Those are just two of the books. But my day in prison, my later days in prison, is getting up, praying. That was the first thing I did. I prayed 5 times a day. I got up, I prayed. I went to work out. I did like maybe hour, 2.5 hours on the yard training my body. From there, I went to work, and my work at that time was going to be the tutor at the violence prevention programs. And then the rest of the day, I studied and I helped other people, ran programs. And that was part of my day, my later days.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Scott, I think we're on to you for the next question.
I think so. I know you must have been in how many different facilities when you were down, Leroy?
Ooh, every last one of them except for about 3. Just put it like that.
Okay. Where were you the last place?
Oh, I was at Adrian.
Adrian, okay.
Adrian.
Okay, so in doing doing your bit with all these different facilities, you
Yes.
came in contact with a lot of different wardens, I'm sure, or at least
Yes, I have.
the mythology of the warden, you know.
Yes.
I was there for a couple of years, and I think I saw the warden one time, you know.
Mm.
So my question for you is, we're going to kind of put on our wizard hat, our Gandalf kind of a hat here, and think about, if you were the warden in the last facility you were in, what would you have done differently to make life better for the men that were there?
When I was at Adrian facility, they had no programs. I'm a real heavy program type person. Like, I was in the Chance for Life program. I studied mediation, conflict resolution. I studied those things under Chance for Life. So I'm really studying that. But Adrian had no programs, and Adrian had a real bad gang problem. And it was because the men there had nothing to do but to fight and sell drugs and prey on each other. And if I was the warden there, that's what I would have done. I would have made that prison a program prison. For instance, there's a warden named Sherry Burke. Best warden I ever ran across in my whole 35 years. I was at her facility from around 2012 to 2015. And she said that she wanted her facility to be ran like a college, and it was. She had all the programs there. So I remember when I got there, and I came down from level 5. I did a lot of time in level 5. So when I got there, I wrote my brother, and he said, man, he said, you back down to a level 2. He said, you the smartest man I know. I don't understand why you keep going back to level 5. He said, you need to stop that. He wrote me a letter and told me that. So in my mind, I was like, man, I do this to keep you safe. Because the way prison works is that people associate your family with you. So I was like one of the most dangerous guys on the yard. So all of my family that came to prison, they knew, oh, that's Leroy X's brother, that's Leroy X's cousin. So they respected them because they respected me. So in my mind, I was like, I'm doing this for you, man. So you will be safe. But he was trying to tell me that I need to do something for myself. So he'd say, listen, man, you're in level 2. My people are going to be there. Chance for Life people are going to be there. I need you to go to Chance for Life. So I had never been in programs before 2012. I wasn't messing with them. So I was like, all right. So I meet Tom and Jessica, Tom Adams and Jessica Taylor. And Tom pulled me to the side. He said, man, you're Lamar X's brother? I said, yes, I am. He said, that's my man. He said, I'm going to get him home. He said, you want to study my program? I said, yes, sir. He said, all right. So long story short, I became like the top student. I had my own class of 30 people I was teaching. Every day I had my own class I was teaching. But what Sherry Burke did, she did this. When I got there, I got a call to the auditorium. When I went over there, it was the warden, deputy warden, the captain, all the lieutenants and the sergeants. And it was literally like 25 guys in there. All these guys I knew that were really like, they were head guys on the yard. They ran every yard. So we all looking at each other like, man, what we doing over here? Then you got the warden there with us. So she says, everybody don't get nervous. We know everybody here are leaders. We know who you guys are. We done read your files. Mm-hmm. I want to start a new program, a peer program here, and I want you guys to be a part of it. It was called the Power of Peace program. And she did something smart. She took all the leaders she knew of on the compound, brought us all together under one umbrella, and gave us instructions on how she wanted her compound to be. And I think that if I was the warden, I would want to do something like that. Mm-hmm. I would want to make sure that the men have something to do, because when they don't have nothing to do, they're going to prey on each other.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you give them incentive to learn. Mm-hmm. You know, as they learn, you give them more freedoms as they learn. You know, and that's what I would do if I was the warden. I would make my prison like a college.
I think that sounds like it'd be a real workable kind of way to go through your time. So I appreciate your thoughtful response on that. And then I'm going to pass on to Elise. I think she's got a question she wanted to ask as well. Thank you, Leroy.
Yes, sir.
So Leroy, throughout the time that we were been able to talk to you, you've been very introspective, very reflective. And I wanted to give you a few minutes to answer this question. If you could speak to your victim or your victim's family, what would you say?
That's a very powerful question. I've always thought about that throughout the years I've been in prison. I went to school with my victim's son, and I've always wanted to talk to him. I've always wanted to tell him sorry for taking his father away from him. I didn't know that was his dad. I didn't know his dad. But I remember his face in school. And I've always seen his face in my mind, always. For 35 years, I've always woke up and I saw his face. And I remember when I went to court to get my re-sentence, I mentioned that to the judge and to the prosecutor because they couldn't find the family. I knew his name, and I said his name. And based on me giving my allocution saying that I want to talk to him and saying his name, they went and found him. And he still didn't really want to talk to me, I guess. But he sent a message to me through my attorneys and through the prosecutor. And he said, man, live your life, man. You know, I took a life, and I owe my life to society because of the life I've taken. And I know that. And I live my life based on me understanding that I owe society my time. I owe society my blood. I owe society my sweat. I owe society my tears. And that's what I'm willing to give to other people, to other young people, so they won't make the same mistakes that I made. And if I could say something to the victim's family, I would say, man, I'm sorry, man. You know, I know that sorry can't get it, but I'm sorry. And it's hard, you know, because I know I've had people in my family that has died, you know, and I feel that pain. I know I feel the same pain they feel, you know, and dealing with the situation that happened in my case, it didn't have to happen. I didn't find out later that he only owed the guy $65. I found it out later, and I didn't know. You know, as a teenager, I was one of those guys that just want to help. A guy come to me, look, man, you need to roll with me. I'll roll with you, and I was stupid, and that's what I did. I was a kid, you know, and I always think about that in my life. You know, I'll never put myself in another situation where I just blindly follow somebody or blindly wondering, blindly going with somebody doing stupid stuff. I don't do that. And that taught me a valuable lesson. So if I could say something to the victim's family, I would tell them I was sorry, man. I owe them my life. And that's real.
Yeah.
I wish you.
Oh,
Yeah.
you can keep going if you have anything else to say.
No, that's it.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I know that is something that people do need to hear. Especially because you mentioned you've been thinking and seeing his face every single day.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you another question. And it could be another question regarding your victim or the family, but do you wish we asked you another question? That we only have a few minutes left.
I don't know. I think that we can never lose sight of the victims of society. You know, right now we're celebrating my transition into a better life, but we have to always keep in mind that somebody lost a life. And we need to let people know that in celebrating somebody's life of becoming a better human being does not and should not overshadow the life that has been taken. Because our goal now is to stop that, is to stop people from taking other people's lives. You know, that's our goal now. You know, I think that this podcast should be used from that angle to help younger people understand that they don't have to be in the streets. They don't have to do the things that I've done as a child. They don't have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if there's an actual question that I wish you guys would have asked me, but I'm glad that you asked me that question because I really wanted to speak to that we should always be focused on victims. You know, like if I can, my firm, My ministries is dealing with violence and victims prevention. So I would like to prevent people from committing violence and prevent people from making victims. That is my goal in life, and I guess that's it.
Of course, I think a lot of your work that you are doing now, especially wanting to do your own violence prevention classes, especially with the youth, very much reflects everything that you've been telling us throughout this interview. Scott, did you have something to say, or Ariana?
I think Ari has maybe the last question, maybe.
Yeah, I actually have a question. We'll see how we're doing on time, but I have a follow-up question if I'm able to ask that before the final question. Regarding advice that you would give to others. So, in the work that we do as occupational therapists working with people who have been incarcerated, sometimes we come across people that, what sounds like the guilt of the crime that was committed. What advice would you give to someone that is sitting in that guilt currently, and it's so difficult to move beyond that? How did you get from feeling that pain to wanting to do something different, and to the point that you're at right now? What advice would you give to someone who's sitting in that, struggling with that?
Most people struggle with the guilt because they don't know how to give back.
Mm-hmm.
And most may think that they don't have the skills to give back. Mm-hmm. But I would say that to that person, first develop empathy. Once you develop empathy, once you put yourself in your victims or in the victim's family's shoes and feel what they feel, and then you have to come out of that. Because the guilt won't take you further than where you're at. It won't take you further. So what you have to do is you have to say, okay, well, listen, I made a bad error, a mistake. I made a bad mistake or a bad error. Okay, now how can I somewhat fix it? And you have to go about fixing it. You can't just sit home and just die in guilt. You can't do that. You got to get up and do something that will help turn other people around. And with me, it's like I feel sick when I'm not helping other people because I'm not doing what I know I'm supposed to do. Like even right now, me having a job that I have, it's not my passion to be working in a plant. I really want to teach. I want to be in a classroom teaching, but I know it's going to take time for me to get there, so I'm doing what I can do to make sure I get there though. But I would say to that person, look, man, you need to get up, get out, share your experience, get off your chest, and just know that you have people around you that can actually help you become better, but you got to help other people become better. Because in the world we're living in, especially people like myself, if people don't see the work that you're trying to do to help other people, they don't really want to talk to you. But if they see that you want to help other people, you will have other people trying to help you help other people. And that's what's real.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what I would say to them.
Thank you. Scott, I was going to ask you, Scott, do you want to wrap us up?
Absolutely, yes. I think it's been such a blessing to have Leroy with us today, and answering from the heart and sharing his story. It's going to be instructive to other people who are just coming home. It's going to be instructive by not only reflecting on what their time was like inside, but if they have an opportunity to influence someone else and an opportunity to pass along some wisdom to them, I think what Leroy's been talking about is just real powerful, and I think it'd be great to steer people toward Leroy and his ministry, and to learn from him directly as well. But I appreciate your time, our friend, and thank you for coming on and joining us, especially for our very first podcast. It's very powerful, and we really appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Leroy, one sentence takeaway. It's the main thing you want people to take away in one sentence.
3 things that I live by in my life. love, acceptance, and affection. And I think that every human being deserves that.
Mm.
If you don't love a person, learn how to accept them.
Mm.
If there's no love and acceptance, just be affection. Just show some type of affection. But love, affection, and acceptance is what all of us need as human beings, and I think that that's what all of us need to live by.
Yes, period. Thank you.
Amen, brother.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yes.
guys.
Thank you.
Very inspiring. Thank you.
Mhm.